Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And it's good when pressure works, and we see today being here to put forward the amendments that will change the legislation that went through this House and was poor legislation amended to actually fix a problem that was going to really compromise the local small newspapers in regional Victoria. It's good to see sometimes pressure does work. So it's really surprising, though, to hear from the other side that, they can see that there's really important, it's important to support regional newspapers. Well, where were they when the legislation went through that was passed through this House but got to the upper house before it was recognised, despite the efforts made by us on this side to actually put some amendments, make some changes, put the debate forward to say this will really hurt regional newspapers. The importance of regional newspapers to be able to tell the story of our communities is very important. For the government to think that putting everything online, the public notices, would have had disastrous effects, particularly in very rural and regional areas, financially crippling, in fact. So I don't know if I've actually heard anyone admit they got it wrong, but that's what's happened, and it's good that it's going to be rectified, because newspapers still play a very important role, particularly for older people who might not be tech savvy or be able to utilise the internet. And of course there's many areas where the internet isn't adequate yet for them to be able to access this information. So to have it in print is still a very vital way to receive that information. I think it shows the government's lack of understanding of how regional Victoria actually operates and how we live. It's a total demonstration of the disconnect between the Labor government and rural Victorians. To hear from the members saying things like, we're going to take everyone into the 21st century. Well, in the 21st century, you'd expect to have some good roads, for example. Well, we haven't got them, so maybe we can start with some stuff that we actually need before rushing through things like this with obviously no or little consultation, because once the voices started to be heard, then it was very obvious from the press that this was going to be a very poor outcome for regional Victoria. So to stand here, I support the amendment by my colleague, the member for Eildon, that actually makes it very clear that it needs to be in legislation that published in a print newspaper circling in that part of regional or suburban Victorian. That's the very clear. We want to make sure it's very clear so this out-of-touch government can't try this little manoeuvre again, which I wonder about their intent with the lack of transparency that this would result in. I mean, it's not easy for people, many people, to get onto a website and hunt through the plethora of information to find, specific public notices. And it's not. When you go in the country for, to a trip somewhere, you don't actually think, I better look up and make sure the roads aren't closed. But you do read the paper on a Saturday when they're usually in my part of the world, it's often Saturday, and you do note those things. So it's just the way it's still happening, because the internet is not ideal for everyone, and it's certainly not a tool yet that is so usable and available that we can get rid of the print newspapers. So papers like the Warrnambool Standard, the Portland Observer, the Terang Express in my electorate play an incredibly important role. And they play a role that, if we had have seen this legislation go through, that revenue they receive from the public notices would have disappeared, and it would have left them possibly very close to unviable, and so it was a massive risk to their viability. And we need those newspapers. Many a time we saw during the pandemic the role that the newspapers played informing the community. We're seeing in Portland the information that's playing out in the paper around the hospital and the closures and maternity services being abruptly ceased. And that's how people get their information in the community. So we absolutely need the government to have done this backflip, and that's what it is. They sat here and they said, oh, this is great, we stood up for regional Victorians, but no, that's actually not true. They sat there silent, they watched this legislation go through, they said nothing despite hearing that it would actually do a lot of damage to regional Victorians, and you sit there and you wonder why. You think, how could a group of MPs who say they understand regional Victoria have let this happen? What's their motive? Do they not really care about regional Victoria? Well, again, as I say, when I look at the state of our roads, when I look at the way they're treating Portland Hospital, I think that's probably the exact reason that they're so city-centric as a government. They're so focused on the votes that get them into government. They are very prepared to throw the regional communities to the wolves. And that's what we're seeing, certainly, in southwest Victoria in many ways. So I do commend the fact that this pressure has worked, and I hope the government do start to recognise the importance of the regions and start thinking about governing from border to border instead of from tram tracks to tram track. And with that, I commend my colleague's amendment to the amendment, the member for Eildon's amendment to the House.